Welcome back to the Wargamers Workshop. Today we're going to be giving my fledgling Emperor's Children force a dramatic new way to storm the battlefield: Legion Astartes drop pods. This kit is seriously high on coolness factor, but unfortunately it has an astronomically bad price per point ratio. Join me today as we build and paint these purple harbingers of destruction, and stick around to find out if they are cool enough to earn a spot in your Legion Astartes army. In this box, we can build 4 drop pods, and each can be built in one of 2 configurations. A transport able to take 2 bases of infantry onto the battlefield, or the Deathstorm drop pod battery, which allows you to strategically land a giant missile battery right in the heart of enemy forces. Points-wise, wow, are these inefficient, running at either 6 points a pop for the transports or 32 points for 2 in the Deathstorm configuration. The whole box can make at most 64 points. They'd need to be super cool to make up for that. Alright, let's take a look inside. Now just remember, if you are enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more like this in the future. Inside the box, we have 2 sprues, like all Legion's Imperialis kits, each making 2 drop pods. Alongside this, we have a vehicle transfer sheet and the instructions. Taking a closer look at the sprues, there is a lot of plastic in this kit to make each drop pod. I suspect that this is a side effect of making both the inside and the outside of the drop pod. We haven't really seen articulated doors on a Legion's Imperialis kit so far, and I'm interested to see how well these will work in practice. You can see on the sprue that we have a lot of repeated parts for the frames of the drop pods, alongside all of the inside parts for both the transport and the weaponry for the Deathstorm drop pod variant. Now, we're going to assemble 2 of these in each variation because I kind of figure that I can just leave the doors closed if I want to run them in a different configuration. Okay, let's go and get this all assembled so we can begin painting it up. Okay, let's jump straight into the airbrushing. Now, I've left these drop pods in 2 separate sub-assemblies, the upper half and the bottom half of the drop pods. The instructions actually suggest painting in even more parts than this, but for something this size, I figure 2 sub-assemblies are fine. Any smaller, and I'd have trouble holding the parts. We start by priming with Vallejo's Mecha Grey primer, and then we're going to move on to giving the upper half of the drop pod a coat of Broodmother Purple. We then paint the underneath of the drop pods with that same purple colour. Then we mix up some Alien Purple and Coven Purple with a 1:1 ratio to use as our highlight. Now for the upper halves, we can do a pretty standard zenithal highlight. But for the bottom parts, we're going to close the doors as best we can and also paint along the top. In addition to this, we're also going to catch the bottom of the lower part of the pod as well using a horizontal motion. And this will give the panels just that little bit of variation. We then follow this up with a coat of matte black through the airbrush for the top of the lower half of the drop pod. So that's like the interior of the drop pod. We're going to be painting most of this with metallic paints later on. Now we move on to painting with a brush. We're going to start with picking out the panels on the upper half of the drop pod using matte black, in particular painting the recessed areas on the sides. We also paint some of the areas on each of the doors of the drop pod using matte black. So one of the areas up the top, as well as 2 recessed parts at the bottom of each door. We'll also paint the base area of the drop pod. We then use Cultist Purple as an edge highlight for the purple areas for both the lower and the upper halves of the drop pod. This step requires a lot of patience. There is so many edges on these drop pods. Let's keep going with the edge highlighting. So for the matte black areas, we're going to be using deep grey as an edge highlight. And so this is for areas on both the upper and the lower halves of the drop pods. Okay, time to start painting the inside of the drop pod. We start with a coat of gunmetal over all of the inside of the doors, as well as the center platform and equipment on the infantry drop pod. While using this paint, we're also going to paint the turbine and the interior weapon on the upper half of the pod. We then use matte black to paint a line of black along the outside of the doors. This is going to be the basis of a hazard stripe. We then proceed to paint small yellow segments using demonic yellow, trying to keep them nice and consistently sized. Now, hazard stripes are a bit of a new one for me. I'd be an absolutely terrible Iron Warriors player. How on earth do you manage to paint nice hazard stripes on your units? If you have a good strategy, let me know in the comments. Still, at least these don't need to be perfect to look really effective at this scale. For the infantry drop pod, we're going to try and create a glowing orange light in the center of the platform. And so for this, we're going to be using lava orange to paint up that glowing light. We'll then follow this up with some radiation glow effect paint to create a glowing effect emanating from that light in the center of the platform. Finally, for the Deathstorm missile pods, we're going to paint the tips and the missiles red using pure red. And there we have it, 4 drop pods assembled and painted and ready to drop directly into the heart of battle. These took a surprising amount of time to build and to paint. And I suppose that kind of makes sense. If you think about it, you're almost building and painting 2 individual units per drop pods, especially if you're tackling them as sub-assemblies. I can't help but wonder if the way that these drop pods have been set up is really helping their value proposition. I mean, ultimately, you're gonna need multiple boxes if you want to actually use these seriously in a battle. There are loads of ways that Games Workshop could have approached this differently, and I think it would have ended up with a better end product. I did have an absolute blast building and painting up these drop pods, and I think they turned out great. No doubt, these are gonna find a spot in my Emperor's Children force, though I'm not sure if I have the appetite to build up and paint any more boxes of them. How about yourself though? Are you going to be adding any drop pods to your force? What about the Dreadnought drop pods? They look pretty cool as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in a future video.